So this will be fun because we've actually never worked together, but I basically became part of the Mutual Admiration Society for all your posts regarding AI. Where does that come from?
When I was in elementary school, my mom and her boyfriend bought 30 acres of land in the middle of nowhere, Tennessee, from the back of a hippie magazine called Mother Earth News. And I lived for several years of my core childhood years in the middle of the woods with no electricity and no running water. But, I took a 45-minute bus ride each way to a regular school where everybody else had electricity and everybody else knew the movies. I saw Goonies for the first time last year. Because, I'm always any cultural touchstone of the mid 80s. I
missed it?
Yeah, well, no, because I was at home reading books literally with a kerosene lantern in a bracket in the wall.
Huh. And then it's interesting though, but you've so gravitated towards tech.
I think it's because I'm not interested in technology for its own sake. I love people. And I love how people make sense of technology and how technology changes the way we engage with each other. I've always said that that time as a child, when I was a kid, I hated it because no kid wants to be the weirdo who doesn't have electricity.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I'm very thankful for it because in some ways I feel like an anthropologist of my own species. Always a part of me in any kind of given situation that I'm sort of looking at how everybody kind of shows up, how they engage with each other, how they sort of kind of decide who's the boss and decide how they all fit together. I've always, even as a little kid, would kind of stand and sort of watch all of that. And I think what I love about technology is that those intersections and interactions become so much more closer to the surface, I love, actually, no, I don't love making TV commercials. I find it very stressful, but I've made many TV commercials that are very good, that have done well, that people have really liked. But the thing that I always hated about it is I couldn't tell if they were doing what I wanted them to do. I couldn't tell if they were touching people the way I wanted them to touch them.
Mm-hmm.
You put it out into the world like a message in a bottle and hope that somebody picks it up.
Well, and it's also not yours anymore. And that's part of the process is whenever you launch a project and it goes out into the world, that's when your attachment to it in some ways ends and then it becomes something else.
Yeah, exactly. And I think from the very beginning of my work in advertising, I just find a lot of quote unquote traditional advertising to be incredibly narcissistic. It's let us stand up here and tell you all about ourselves. Mm-hmm. Because it's still grounded in a world where people had to listen. And I think ideas like the Domino's pizza tracker or some of the things that I've made in my career, they're designed to do something. They're designed to have a spirit of generosity to them.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's something that if you look at a lot of my work that I'm most proud of, there's a spirit of generosity that underlies all of it. Whether that's we see something in you, we recognize something in you, we want to make something that makes your life more useful, or even in a television commercial, I'm always thinking about how can I make something that respects the time and attention of the people that we're trying to reach. And I just I'll use any tool on the planet that helps me do that helps me get closer to people.
Well, I mean, that's your purpose, right? And that's why I feel like you've become so adept at using new technology, because like you said, you're not doing it for just, hey, there's this new tool, I'm going to use it. It's this will help me accomplish this thing a little bit better, a little bit easier, a little bit faster, or in a new way. So it makes perfect sense that if you're still tracking towards that purpose, all these new things are just tools to help you do that.
Exactly. That's exactly right. I love large language models because, and this goes back to my bugaboo that anybody who knows me has heard me said, I think it's a terrible misnomer to call it artificial intelligence because there's nothing artificial about it. I very much believe that it should be called, especially when it comes to large language models, collective intelligence, because what it is a giant hyperdimensional mind map, essentially, of the combined collective recordings of human thinking. Everything from, the oldest philosophers all the way to people on some random subreddit. All of that is in there. It's all of us in there. And that's what you're connecting with every time you talk to a large language model. My favorite thing to do in the world is learning. And my other favorite thing to do in the world is reading. Mm-hmm. I was a lonely little kid with no electricity. I read a shit ton of books, and I still read probably every year between 75 and 100 books. And so for me, like, interfacing with a different perspective, interfacing with a different intelligence, for lack of a better word, through the medium of the written word is not weird to me at all.
Yeah.
It felt like really natural to me to talk to these other quote unquote minds through the medium of words, because that's what you're doing when you're reading a book.
That's exactly what it is. And what's interesting is too, sometimes when you're reading a book, do you ever have this moment where you've read like a novel and then someone like, I loved it, and then you're like, what actually happened? There's something about reading that it's almost like you're thinking it yourself in a way. And I do feel like by adapting that relationship with these tools, it does help you utilize them a lot better, because you're less thinking of them as an adversary and more just an extension of like your own process.
That's absolutely right. Yes. There's sometimes an impulse to reject new technology without actually taking the time to understand it. So I think Web3 is a great example, right? Mm-hmm. Like, people like love mocking Web3, love mocking NFTs. They're like, I can't believe that people are buying and selling these JPEGs that you could just right click on. But what that reflected was a fundamental misunderstanding of what was actually going on, because people weren't buying JPEGs. They were buying the JPEG because the JPEG gave you access to secret channels in the community Discord that you couldn't get into. Mm-hmm. It didn't have this marker of membership. It was about the eternal, irresistible appeal of a locked door that other people are on the other side of that you can't get to.
Yeah, access.
It was about access. It was about community. It was about belonging. We're still the same. Yeah. The technology changes, but the humanness of us doesn't. And that's where I've always liked to play, is how do I take the like essential humanness of us and use technology to explore that in different ways.
For a person who is a tech super optimist or tech optimist, I would say, like, what is the thing with like ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude or whatever that you think is most dangerous to our industry?
I think it has nothing to do with the technology and everything to do with us. There are a couple things that I think about. One is, one of the reasons that I'm able to use this technology so effectively is I'm a really good creative. And I'm a really good creative because I spent 20 years learning how to be a really good creative. Mm-hmm. And what I see happening a lot with large language models is that your role as the human collaborator becomes, in a sense, we're all creative directors. Which, if you're already a creative director, totally fine.
I always said this is like, who's going to use ChatGPT really well to write copy? Really great copywriters.
Yeah, but it's like, what if you don't know yet how to be a great copywriter? What if you don't know how to do something yet? How do we create a world or a framework for thinking about this technology that doesn't make us lazy, mm-hmm. and that doesn't make us passive? And that's something I think about a lot, is I think about how passive as a culture we are a lot. We sit, a very small percentage of people are making all the content, and most of us are just sitting there
Yeah, I saw the TikTok stat the other day is 25% of the people on the platform produce 98% of the content.
So that means the other 75% are just sitting there mindlessly swiping, and that's how they're spending their day. Mm-hmm. And I worry about that. I worry that the way that AI is being used and being promoted right now is as a replacement for thinking, mm-hmm. rather than as a partner to help us be better thinkers. Even if you look at LinkedIn, right? LinkedIn's got these, like, I've been trying to figure out how to turn it off, and I can't. It's got these like AI takeaways at the bottom of every post, where it's got this magic button that will write your post for you. And so I start to see comments that I'm like, people are writing their comments with a large language model. They're just like, make a comment, make a comment, make a comment, make a comment. So we're all now just like spamming each other.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
So that's part of it, sort of the laziness of it is hard for me. And also that, like, if you think about education, Most of the energy that's going in to AI with education that I see is, how do we figure out when people are using it? How do we detect AI generated writing? And I'm like, that is the most short-sighted way to do it. It's like, of course people are going to use it to take shortcuts, but also we haven't taught them any other way to use it. Put whatever it is that you want to learn. Like, I was talking to my nephew when I was visiting my parents. I have a 17-year-old nephew who was talking about school, and he's like, I just love sports. And I said, did you know that you could use ChatGPT to learn anything and have it teach you anything in the world you could possibly imagine using sports metaphors? And he was like, what? I was like, yeah. And I showed him an example of teaching. Like, I was like, teach me about the fundamentals of quantum mechanics using sports metaphors. And I read it to him, and watching his eyes light up to be like, this thing that I would have thought was way more complicated than I could ever understand, I understand this and I get it and it makes sense and it's interesting to me. Like, that's where we should be spending our energy when it comes to how to teach kids and people in education to use this. It's like, don't use it. I see people using it as a way to make outputs faster versus as a way to give themselves more unexpected, interesting, surprising, eye-opening inputs.
Yeah. It is like, so much of the conversation has been about speed. And it's like, what about quality?
And of course, now we're in a world where companies are looking to replace people with things that are faster and cheaper, because that's what the entire conversation has been. When I'm like, wait a second, this is a technology, you know, I'm 45 years old. I've been looking through these two eyeballs through my whole life. And now I can look through any eyes, because when you think about every trace that you leave, think about every interview that you do, combine all of those, and you do start to get a picture of who somebody is. Like, I'm really bad at like social stuff and politics, probably because I was a weird kid in the woods when everybody was learning how to do all that stuff. And it's hard for me. And so sometimes I will be like, hey, I want to talk to like Sun Tzu about how to handle this strategically so I don't go flopping around making a big mess. And so Sun Tzu will be like, hello, like, let me teach you the art of war. And I'm like, okay, this is really helpful.
What is the best way to not be lazy with these tools? Like, what are the steps to becoming a really great creative in 2024? Is it the same?
It's the same. It's always the same. It's the same thing. Albert Einstein once said, he said, I don't have any special talents. What I really have is I'm not going to get the language exactly right, but that's okay. But he basically was like, I'm not really talented. I'm just incredibly curious. And this is a world, and I feel really strongly about this, that like, we're about to enter a world where knowing the answer to something is not going to be special. Knowing how to do something is not going to be special. Being curious, having an attitude of, I don't know, but I bet I can figure it out. That has always been the most important thing for any creative person to have. The way that we have learned to use computers in our world does such a fundamental disservice to us when it comes to working with these models, because they're not computers. They are, I mean, in that they run on computers and they're, you know, like algorithms, but really fundamentally they're human simulators. They're human simulators. Just pretend there's another person on the other side.
Yeah.
Pretend that you're talking to a creative partner. And it's really clear to me that most of the time when people work with large language models, they show up as really shitty partners. Like, if I go to work with a creative partner and I'm like, give me 10 ideas, and then they give me 10 ideas and I'm like, make them funnier.
That's a terrible creative
very
partner.
good. That's a awfully shitty creative partner.
Yeah.
And like, if a human did that to you, would you be like, oh wow, we're really going to get some good ideas together?
I can't remember who said this, but I remember like there was a guide going around about how to prompt effectively, and someone was like, this just sounds like what a great creative brief is. Like, literally the exact way you should be successful with an AI model or a GPT or Gemini is literally sort of the same way you can be effective with a human creative partner.
Yeah. Because it's trained on us. It's trained on everything that they could get their words on, but all of those things are human expressions. Those are all us taking our perspectives and codifying them into language.
What's one thing one little thing that we can do on a, like a person like me, someone else, someone who's listening could do on a daily basis to make themselves better prepared for this technology?
I would say, first off, if you can afford $20 a month, is to get a paid subscription. I don't care if you use ChatGPT. I don't care if you use Claude.ai. I don't care if you use Gemini. Use something. Pay for something, because the number of people I've discovered are still, if they're using anything, they're using the free version of ChatGPT is like mind-boggling to me, because you're basically using like my first like little Tykes carpenter set and wondering why you're not able to build anything that feels real.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing I would say. And then the other thing I would say is just use it, and not use it to try to use it so that you know how to use it for your job.
Yeah.
Is just use it, is entertain yourself. If you have Google as the thing that comes up when you open a new tab in your browser, change it to whatever large language model you use and start there instead.
I love that idea, because there's so many times where I'm Googling something and I'm like, you know what? I should be using GPT for this. Building this tech into what you're already doing, and not forcing yourself to using it, making it easy to use rather than making it interruptive to your process. Just build it in and you'll naturally, and like you said, curiosity is our superpower here.
Curiosity is our superpower as creatives, as marketing people, but also as humans. Think about a kid. Most of the time kids do things because they're like, I wonder what would happen. Think about how every kid is constantly asking questions. And I think one of my biggest superpowers is that I've never lost contact with that part of me who wants to understand, who's curious, who's always like, what happens if I do this? And now I have a partner who's always available at any time to be like, I don't know, let's find out. Or like, great question, let's dig into that, which I think it's incredibly cool.